Hello, I'm Nataliya Shpylova Saeed. This spring, Arrowsmith Press is publishing 4 books that respond to Russia's all-out attack on Ukraine, and these titles include Lyudmila Khersonska's Today is a Different War, translated into English by Olga Livshin, Maya Chhabra, Lev Friedman, and Andy Janko. A crash course in Molotov cocktails by Halina Kruk, translated by Emilia Glaser and Yulia Ilchuk. The 3rd volume is In the Hour of War, an anthology of poetry edited by Caroline Forshey and Ilya Kaminsky. And Do Not Close Your Eyes, an album of war drawings by Hanna Melnyczuk Stecewycz. And today I'm delighted to speak with Hanna about her work. Hanna Melnyczuk received an MFA from Massachusetts College of Art. Her work has appeared at Art Space in Menard, University of Massachusetts, Lowell Mahoney Gallery, the Gallery at the Piano Factory, the Danforth Museum, Tufts Gallery, Brush Gallery, Fountain Street Gallery, New Art Center, and more. She has curated 2 art exhibits, Agni Magazine of Emerging Artists, and the other one, a traveling exhibit of Ukrainian artists' works, Don't Close Your Eyes, responding to the current war. Hanna teaches drawing and 2D design at University of Massachusetts Lowell and lives in Groton with her husband Joseph, her daughter Lara, and their cat Tallow. You can also see more of her work at www.hannamelnyczuk.com. Hello, Hanna, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So, Don't Close Your Eyes will be published this season by Arrowsmith Press, and the book is a response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Let me read the preface to the volume. February 24th, 2022, Putin's invasion of Ukraine changed the trajectory of many lives, including my own. My work has dealt with the theme of my Ukrainian heritage throughout my career. After visiting Ukraine and living there for 4 months in 1991, I felt very close to the people and the world my parents left in 1945. Some of my previous artwork reflects the influence of this experience. Then on February 24th came news of the war in Ukraine. In absolute disbelief, I, like many of the world, asked, how can this be happening in the 21st century? As the war unfolded, the images in my mind changed from being colorful representations of a child's world, stemming from my work on children's books, to darker images depicting tanks, missiles, refugees, and a mass grave in Bucha. These images continued to appear, and to trouble me, I began a series of drawings based on my feelings about the war. This is a compilation of those drawings. So the volume includes drawings that represent your living through the current moment while witnessing the atrocities committed by Russia in Ukraine. When did you decide to put together a collection of drawings in response to the war?
I started to make these drawings right after pretty much the week of when the war began, or perhaps the next week. It was just an immediate response. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I mean, as many people, what can I do? So I went to my studio on the 2nd floor or the 3rd floor of my home and just started working on these drawings. And the first one, it's not in that book. I just wanted to show the first drawing, if you could see it here. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. Yes. It was pretty, it's not tragic. It's not hopeful. I mean, it's a bit of tragedy and hope. I think that I really, other people didn't think the war was going to go on for so long, and who knew? So the original first images were more like this, and then they began to change as the war progressed, and horrible things happened, and I followed it every day. So,
Would you talk a little bit about your Ukrainian background? The topic of identity is not new for you, and you've been interested in your Ukrainian background before the war broke out.
oh yes, of course. I mean, my parents, as mentioned in the prefaces there in the forward, that they came here in 1950, and we spoke Ukrainian at home. We went to Ukrainian school. My mother was the principal of Ukrainian school. Both of my parents were very involved in Ukrainian organizations. I went to Ukrainian Girl Scouts. So in some ways, I was brought up more Ukrainian than anything else. So it's a huge part of me. My cousins, we lived in a two-family house at one point, another generation, my grandparents lived with us, and so my cousins, we all grew up together, and my mother used to say to us, speak Ukrainian, whenever she heard any English. So I was very tied to my identity, and so much a part of me, the language is so much a part of me, just always speaking in Ukrainian and reading Ukrainian books, and so very much so. And my art has sometimes touched on the Ukrainian theme, and it can now, with the war, it really is working in that vein. But even prior to this, some of my work had.
Yeah, you also mentioned that as you were witnessing the war, your drawings changed. So would you talk a little bit about this change, and maybe we can also put this in the context of those drawings that you created before the war, and how those were probably also different from those that you created after the war broke out?
Well, it's interesting because as many artists, my work has evolved and changed and gone through different forms through the years. And in the last, maybe, I was trying to think how long it's been, maybe like 7 years or even maybe a little bit longer, I became interested in doing children's book illustration. Whereas prior to that, I was doing many other kinds. I was drawing large portraits and doing other work, but I became interested in doing a children's book. Maybe really, as a parent, when my daughter was younger, I would read to her. And I remember growing up with so many, I still have them, Ukrainian children's books. I mean, it was a huge part of my childhood. I have many. And being very fascinated by them. But for some reason, I didn't go in that direction. So some years ago, like I said, maybe 7 years ago, I started to be interested in that. And what happened is it's been very slow to evolve, this work, but I have been written a few books, but they haven't been published just yet. Now, what happened is literally the week before the war, I was doing drawings of, as is mentioned, of these colorful, a child's world, very, very playful, very whimsical. And the next day, or when I heard of the war, I thought, how can I keep making these drawings? I mean, they just don't fit my psyche now. They're just not in me. It was like the world had completely turned upside down. It really did feel that way. It felt so unreal and so impossible. So then the work, I would see these images that were very different from what I was seeing the day before. But what happened is the style that I had been working with, sort of more naive and appropriate for a children's book, was also evident in these works. I mean, it was depicting images in a kind of way that isn't, I've looked at other artists' works who are more representational and kind of more visceral and darker. But my images, although they have that in them, there's still a little bit of a kind of removal. They're a little bit removed because of their sort of, I think, naive or simpler quality. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you noticed that, yeah.
In that paragraph that I read out, you mentioned that you couldn't believe that something like Russia's war could be happening in Ukraine in the 21st century, and I think that this sentiment will be shared by many, many people. So how does war affect one's sense of identity, and how do you deliver the sense of destruction through drawings? What ways of expression do you find prevalent in your work today?
Mm-hmm. Well, the work that is in the book, so this is maybe, I don't know, 40 drawings or something, and I would go to my studio every day and work almost, I don't want to say maybe hypnotically. I think that's all I could do to respond, because at that time I felt this anguish for the people. I just, I didn't know what else to do. So the works were sometimes based on images that I looked at. Like, for example, when I looked at the image of, I think it was in Mariupol, where they had the mass grave, one of the earlier places, and when I saw that image, my response was, to draw something, but it becomes something else when I draw, I might start off with seeing something and then it evolves into my own kind of way of interpreting it and defining it. So then there was the image of the woman giving birth in the subway station, and many of the stories that I read a lot in the paper and responded a lot to the news. And then I also wanted to, bring, most of the images are in black and white, but then I did want to bring some color into it. And I'm sorry, what was that first part you were asking me about my identity?
Yes, how the war affects one's sense of identity, and how you deliver the sense of destruction, because the events apparently traumatized many, and it includes the sense of lostness, probably, of some part of our previous usual identity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I don't think that my, prior to that, I've always thought, like, I always felt Ukrainian, but I feel like with this, the violence, the war, the killing of Ukrainians, the people, children, it's so much for a person to absorb, that it needs to somehow, come out. And in my drawings, I do have images, like I said, that relate to events. And it has changed my work. It has changed the way that I'm approaching. I've become more of a political artist. I don't know how political these drawings are, but more political, more involved in working somehow with Ukrainians, with the artists of Ukraine, because that is my field. To see what they're doing became very interesting for me. Whereas prior to that, I really wasn't engaged with the artist. I was in '91 when I was living in Ukraine for 4 months, but since then I hadn't been in touch with many people. I've met new people, so I don't know if that sort of covers. I'm sure there's more I can say about it, but that's it for now.
So, and the war has already inflicted a tremendous collective trauma on the Ukrainians. But when the war is over, unfortunately, for each and every individual, it won't be over instantaneously. So what are the mechanisms of healing, in your opinion? What should be remembered? What will we remember? And if there are those things that will be allowed to be forgotten in order to heal?
Well, healing, one other thing that has become, that I find myself doing is reading some books that I maybe wouldn't have been as interested in reading or prior to the war, are books a little bit about, whether it's the Holocaust or it's just about how people heal from trauma. And there was an article just recently about all the trauma that the soldiers are going through in the New York Times, with images and, just all the stages, the healing. How will the healing happen? There was going to be intense need for therapy for this, for so many people, and so many experts in the field are going to have to work with the trauma that post-traumatic stress trauma that all the individuals, the soldiers, the children, the adults, underwent. And I mean, I think the things also to be remembered is the way that the people in the country united, and how there's this sense of, working together, helping each other, really the unity that has been formed among groups in Ukraine, among the diaspora, among everybody in the whole world, in some, not the whole world, but parts of the world who have reacted to this tragedy, and the need for compassion to those who have gone through everything, through all of this, and the need for an emotional sort of connection. Everybody needs that, and so many ways of healing there will be available to people, but maybe not soon enough. Not soon enough. And I just don't know how, just for example, there's a soldier in our area which my newspaper will be interviewing, and he was sent here because he needed to get an operation that he wasn't able to get done in Ukraine, and now one of his friends is in Germany, and he's getting prosthetic limbs. So much of that. I mean, there's just so much, but I think that what's happened is people are really trying to help, and they're trying to think, how can we help? And it's not always just financial, it has to be, I don't know, there's so many other ways to probably help, that one has to unite with the people that have gone through the suffering. I often wonder, are there people, I know that there are people coming into Massachusetts, but I don't know of that many, and I don't know where all the people are resettling. And sometimes I heard in Springfield, Massachusetts. So the people will need a lot of healing and care for trauma, and all the stages of grief, and all this unnecessary, all this stuff that's so unnecessary and so insane.
Well, exhibitions are one of the ways to keep Russia's war in Ukraine visible on the international level, I would say. And you had a few events. Would you share how you arranged these exhibitions, and what were those goals that you were setting up when promoting these events?
Oh, sure. Well, what happened is, as I was making these drawings, which every day, like I said, and I was really involved in them. And then once we had a conversation with my cousin or my relative in Lviv, Vera and Zanik. We were on Zoom with them. We occasionally Zoom with them. And I was on the call with my brother, I think, was there, and this other artist that I know from New Jersey. And we started speaking about certain things that Askold was doing. And the artist Oleksandr and I sort of said, well, maybe we need to do something too, art related. And so kind of started that way, but eventually it became a little bit more of my interest because people got busy. So what happened is I was on Instagram, which was pretty new to me, but someone had told me about this artist in Ukraine, in Lviv, Danilo Mukchan. I looked at his Instagram, I saw the work of Hanna, and I really liked her work, and I connected with her. She's a young Ukrainian artist. And I said, do you think you want to do something with bringing the work to the United States rather than just auctioning it off online or just sending me prints? Do you think we can do this? And it evolved. It took a long time to happen. I mean, she knew artists, so she recommended artists. I got in touch with a lot of the artists, and it grew from like 6 artists to 26 artists. And people said, do you want me to send? At first I said maybe 3 images. Okay, then it was 10 images. So we have a lot of work still, and this is traveling. It's in New Jersey. It was in 2 places in Massachusetts. A small part of it will go to the Ukrainian Institute in New York, Chicago. I'm thinking of DC, I'm not sure, another place in Concord, Massachusetts. So it's been traveling, and the work is selling. The funds are going, half of it are going to the artists and the other half to Pratula organization. The work is so interesting. I mean, I've purchased a few pieces. It's so interesting for me to see how other artists have, that was also my curiosity to see how are other artists responding, artists that are in Ukraine, artists that are really going through this, it's much closer to them. What are they doing? And, you know, how are they doing if they're so close to it? I thought sometimes that you could become paralyzed, but, you know, on the other hand, you want to, you don't want to, obviously want to do something, and they are selling their work, and with this money, much of them, you know, some of the money is going towards the war to help with that effort. So it's been really interesting, and I've made a lot of good connections with the artists, and plan to work with them some more for sure.
And one of the challenges today is to connect an experience that is part of one's individual story to broader audiences. And as you mentioned, you have Ukrainian background, and probably this is something that also makes this war even more horrifying, probably, because it's part of our life, right? It's part of our memory, and it's part of how we understand ourselves and see ourselves. But how can one tell the story of a Ukrainian who lives through the war and touch the hearts of those for whom Ukraine is just another place on the map?
Well, I mean, in many ways, I suppose. For example, I think a lot of people have already been touched by, if I just can go back to this exhibit, I mean, many of the people that came to see the exhibit were not Ukrainian. It was in Newton, Massachusetts, and people were very interested in the work. They were very sad. I mean, saddened by the work, because it was quite, it's powerful, and it's not really beautiful work, because it's all work that's responding to the war in one fashion or another. So just bringing, that's certainly one way of, keeping people aware of whether, the Ukrainian culture, the Ukrainians, period, not just, well, of course, the war now and the images that depict the war, but there's, there's a lot of interest in my community here in Groton, a small town, is the newspaper is very interested in articles, getting letters from citizens, from people in Ukraine. So Helena Andrusenko, who's my co-curator, she wrote a letter about, her work and how the war had affected her. And so events like this, events like what you're doing, and books that are being published, and just keep going, just keep this information and people's, one of the things that I wanted to say was early on, when we were Zooming with my cousin Zanon in Ukraine, he said, it's very early on, he said, don't forget us. And I said, what do you mean don't forget? What do you mean by that? I really, at that point, it was so early that I just thought, how could we forget? And then I started, I realized this has been a year now, over a year, and people, it's not like you can really forget it, but it's just, you become, as I've heard, and I myself have experienced, a little bit more number. It's become a little bit more, what's happening. Even my cousins that I speak to in Lviv will say something like, well, we're just, we're conducting our lives. What can you do? But of course, they're still working in some form to help with everything. I think everybody's working very hard in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians in the United States and Canada, or wherever they exist, wherever they are all involved in, not all of them, but many are involved in speaking about Ukraine, keeping people aware of it. I mean, when I teach my classes, for example, when the book is published, I'm going to show it to a couple of my classes. It's relevant. Last semester, when I was organizing the exhibit, I talked to the students, showed some of them the work, and my school, my University of Massachusetts Lowell, is interested in showing the work maybe this summer. So we haven't quite decided on that, but just keeping active, not passive, and engaging people, informing people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hanna. Thank you so much for this conversation today, and thank you for your work and for your dedication to keep Ukraine visible. And I'm sure your album will also be part of informing the audiences about not only what's going on the ground, but also what kind of impact wars in general have on the individual, on the civilians as well. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this interview. And again, please visit Arrowsmith Press webpage for the latest updates and news on the upcoming Ukraine-related titles.